Okay, let's start. Let's see what I have here. There we go. I just want to make sure I have that I've covered the notes here. Okay. All right, so if we look through the notes, again, only 3 outcomes this time, but they're substantial. We talked about the basic process. We went through the flood map program. And what we didn't go through was the transitions. So let's go through that. And what do I want to do here? I want to do this. I might cut these guys short. Because I want to talk about the a program that will help you with your project also. Okay, this is under animation, so I need to go. All right. This is Bounce Ball. Bounce Ball is the hello world of the graphics world, of the graphics community. Often the first thing that you build when you learn graphics in a new program is Bounce Ball. And there it is, bouncing. Bounce Ball doesn't have too many interesting features other than it does have an animation, and when I click left mouse in the pane, it pauses the animation. I can't do anything else with it. The next version of Bounce Ball Control, I can speed the ball up. I can still pause it, and I can slow the ball down. So let's talk about how that happens. First of all, in terms of transitions, there's many types of transitions, but 3 types that we'll focus on. The first is the fade transition, where it's like a blinking sign, right? It just fades in, it fades in or fades out. And then if you tell it to keep repeating, it will fade in and out, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Path allows an animation where you first define a path, and then you take a GUI object, a node, and attach it to that path, and then it travels along the path. And again, you can say to repeat that multiple times, to repeat it forever. You can have it do an auto reverse where it goes along the path and then comes back. Those are probably not the 2 that you guys are going to be doing for your projects. If you're going to do anything for your project, it's probably going to be a timeline. And for your Hound and Hare homeworks, I would recommend the timeline. A timeline basically sets up a loop that sets up an animation, right? You're going to incrementally, you have dots on the screen, you're going to incrementally move those dots on the screen. So I'm going to go through the fade and path transitions fairly quickly. The code is available to you. I'm going to go through the bounce ball versions of the timeline fairly quickly, and then spend the rest of the time on this Pirates, this halfway done Pirates game. And the reason is that one really applies to your, applies directly to your how you can set up your projects. So if we look at the fade transition, let's find it here. Bounce ball, all pane, fade transition demo. There it is. All they do in the fade transition, the people who wrote this, there it is, fading back and forth. And I think we can pause it. Let's find out. Okay, I've clicked inside the oval and it's paused. And then when I let go, it keeps going. So let's see how they set up the fade and how they set up the pause. Now, a lot of this is just, as I said, GUI stuff is ugly. So your code gets all kinds of just lines of code that are just there to set up the positions and the shapes and the colors, and it looks ugly. As always, my recommendation is to create separate methods to do this stuff. So all of this is just setting up the ellipse. All right, so they build a pane, they build an ellipse, and then all of this is just setting it up. And what they do, this is a cute trick here. You notice when I resize the window, the pane also resized, and that's what they did here, is they bound the center of the ellipse to the pane width and the center of the Y to the pane height, and then they bound the width of the pane also to the window. The width and radius of the pane to the width and height of the window. How did you know you could do that? Well, this is what these examples are all about. So if you need to do something where you're resizing something because a window got resized, that's how you do it. You can bind one property of one GUI object to the property of another object. And then they set up the fade transition, and it's a real, right? It's an object. The fade transition is an object. You have to import it. And look at what they set up. How long does it last? 3 seconds. What's fading? The ellipse. How much is it fading from? It goes from 100% visible to 10% visible. So that's the from and the to value. How often do you want to do it? Do it forever. Do you want it to go back and forth? Yeah, auto reverse true. Now remember, the name of the fade transition is FT. So once you set up the fade transition, you say ft.play, and then you can set up, again, all kinds of events. And here, for the ellipse itself, if you are in the ellipse and you do a mouse press, set on mouse press, the event is FT pause. Now, what does FT pause mean? Remember, FT is the name of the fade transition object. And so you are pausing that object. And as soon as you release the mouse on set on mouse released, then it fires off FT play, which resumes the animation. So this thing still follows the generic, I build a node, I put the node in the pane, I put the pane in the scene, I put the scene in the stage. And now what we have, though, is not just a static node that sits there, right? It's not just an ellipse that sits there and does nothing. It's an ellipse that fades back and forth. How did we do that? Well, we tied this fade transition, I should say whoever did this code, tied this fade transition to that ellipse. And they did it by creating a fade transition object and saying, what is it that you want to fade back and forth? I want this ellipse to fade back and forth. One good reason to start with this is it is pretty straightforward. Now start thinking about animations. Think of, again, we call them transitions, right? But they're animations. What do you need to know? You need to know how long they last. You need to know if they're going to repeat. You need to know if they just run from one end to the other, or do they reverse back and forth. Once you start thinking about that, you kind of can predict what kinds of parameters you're going to have to set for these things. Here's one called flag rising animation. I hope I have the images. Let's find out. There, it's a flag rising. This is a path transition. What they did is they set a path for it, and it just keeps repeating. Notice it doesn't go up and down, so it doesn't auto reverse, but they did have it repeat. Now it will stop while I'm talking. It will stop because this one is set to repeat 5 times. So after 5 times, it's going to stop. Now, how did they do this? This is a path transition. So first they set up a path. That path is going to be a line, and then they set up the beginning and the end point of the transition, and then they say, repeat rather than repeating indefinitely. This one I believe repeats 5 times. So there, I did it 5 times and it's done. So if we look at the flag rising animation, it's a path transition, not a fade transition. And path transition PT equals new path transition. How long should it last? 10 seconds. What is the path? They created a line. And if you look at these examples, it's 100, 200. That's 100 pixels over, 200 down, and then 100, 0. That's 100 pixels over right at the top of the scene. So it's going 100 from 200. Right, from 200 straight up to 0. That's the path. What's the thing you want to put on the path? Image view. Anything else? Yeah, do it 5 times. Now, if you wanted to do it forever, you would set that as indefinite, like they did on fade transition. Remember, for fade transition, it was set cycle count, timeline dot indefinite. And then, just like before, there was a play and a pause. Now that I've created the path transition, play it. Notice one thing you did not have to do. You did not have to add that to the pane. You added the image view to the pane. The image view contains the actual image. And then you added the pane to the scene and the scene to the stage.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a line that we use. We could use any other shape, right?
Yes. Yes. What a timely question. Let's do path transition demo. But let's spell it right. So here what they've done is they've created a circle, and then they created a rectangle, and the circle is the path and the rectangle is the thing on the path. Again, I don't think you guys will use this. However, you can see where sometimes this would be a good thing. I had someone do a target, like a target gallery, target shooting gallery project once, and they were using path transitions because their targets were going around the screen. You can get really complicated with this if you need to. From your drafting classes, you may remember something called a spline, which is a really complicated curve, and you can create these really complicated curves, and then have your object, your GUI object, travel that very complicated curve. If you know that you're going to do like an old 1980s Atari video game where everything was kind of scripted. If you know you're going to do something like that, then a path transition makes perfect sense. By the way, I think, let's see, can I stop this thing? Yeah, if I'm inside the circle, I can stop it. So they probably attached that to the circle. So here's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting to see a circle being created and then positioned and defined in terms of color. I'm expecting a rectangle to be created and defined in terms of color, but not positioned, because remember, they're going to attach it to the circle. Then I'm going to see a path transition created, and the path will be the circle, and the thing that's attached to the path is the rectangle. And then they've got to do some cute trick to do this. Notice how the rectangle automatically keeps reorienting itself as it goes around the circle, so it's always pointing towards the center of the circle. There's going to be a line of code for that. And then I'm going to look at the cycle count is indefinite, it looks like, because it's not stopping. And it's 1001, 1002, I don't know, maybe 3 seconds long for each animation. And auto reverse is going to be true because it's going back and forth. And then inside that circle, on set mouse pressed, I'm going to see path transition pause, and onset mouse release, I'm going to see path transition play. Once you see a few of these things, you can predict pretty well what you're going to see. All right, so if we look at path transition demo, look at all the stuff you have to bring in though. You have to bring in the path transition and the timeline. In addition, this is in addition to the application and the scene and the stage. You have to bring in a pane, of course, then color, because you want to color things, and color is an object, and then a rectangle, and then a circle, and then, who would have thought, you have to bring in this thing called duration. It's in the other ones too. So they create a pane, they create a rectangle, and notice they didn't do much with the rectangle because it's going to be attached to the circle, so they didn't have to set its position. They created a circle. This is X location, Y location, radius. So they did that, and they put the inside as white and the outside is black. Then they added the circle and the rectangle to the pane. Hopefully this is starting to get really kind of boring, right? Because like you're seeing the same things over and over again. Now creating the path transition. New path transition. Duration is milliseconds. The path is the circle. The node is the rectangle. This is how they got that cute thing with the rectangle. They set the orientation. So the node is always tangential to the curve. They set the cycle count indefinite. And then they set auto reverse to true. These are things that we predicted, right? And then they play the animation. Okay, how did I pause it when I clicked inside the circle? Here it is. Circle. Set on mouse pressed, pause. Set on mouse released, play. Those of you that want to pause your game, technically you could do that with this mouse click, although it's probably annoying to the user if they have to hold their finger on the mouse key to keep the game paused, right? You really want a true pause, but that's how you would do it. If you have a pause button in the corner of your screen, then clicking that pause button the first time would do pt.pause, and then click it again as pt.play. How would you do that? If then else. If the transition is paused, play it. Else, pause it. Okay, so that's the fade and path. Like I said, these are the simpler ones. The bounce ball is the first true free form animation, and it's going to be the timeline. And one of the reasons bounce ball is interesting, I need to get rid of these guys. One of the reasons bounce ball is interesting is because they actually have not just the bounce ball file, but look, they've got a ball pane as a separate entity. And as we see as we go through this, that's a good idea. Remember I said before, if you're creating your pane, you got to create your pane and put the pane in the scene. If you're creating your pane and it's a very complicated one, not a bad idea to create a separate pane as a separate class. You can do all your dirty work there, and then you just have to add it into the top level GUI, and it's fairly straightforward. When we talked about flood map the other day, remember I did that. I created my map that contained the flood map and the buttons separately. And then in my top level GUI, all I said is make me one of those, add it to the scene, add it to the stage, and show it. It's a good idea to, again, going in this whole object-oriented notion, every class should do a relatively small job. Every method should do a very small job. So if inside your main level GUI, you're spending a lot of time developing a pane, That's the code telling you that you should have made the pane separate, and then just bring it in as a, create a version of that object. So the ball pane extends pane. And then they do all this extra stuff, and they've got real live attributes here, right? These are real live attributes. And then they start having methods that do things. Let's see, with a ball that's bouncing, a bounce ball, what do you want to do with it? Well, let's see, you probably want it to bounce off the sides of the walls of the pane that it's in. So that's one thing, and you probably and we're going to be able to have it where it can stop and start. So you should probably create methods where you play and pause the animation. So notice they have these attributes. That's going to set up the circle, that's the ball. Then they have the actual constructor for the ball pane. And what do? They set the circle green and they add the circle to the pane. Then they create that animation, and now it's a timeline animation. Same trick, duration, millis, 50. That's awfully short animation, isn't it? It's a 50 millisecond animation. Well, why are they doing that? Because what's happening, you can think of a timeline as a loop. And so every 50 milliseconds, it's going to continue that loop. And what does it do? It fires off this method every time, move the ball. Now, this whole thing where you check if you're in bounds and bouncing back and forth, that's going to be in the move ball method. As a developer, you don't even have to worry about that right now. I mean, when I develop stuff like this, I'll develop a ball and the first thing it does is it just goes off the screen, and it never stops. Why would I do that? Well, again, code, compile, run, do that as often as you can. At least I know the thing moves. Then I can focus on keeping it in bounds. So timeline, this keyframe is every 50 milliseconds, run the move ball method. And how often should we do it? Do it forever. Timeline indefinite, do it forever. Oh, and then play. So this ball pane is a separate class that extends pane. So we don't have to do all the dirty work at the top level. Then if you look at the top level, which is bounce ball, by the way, I like to name my top level like with the word GUI in it, with the GUI in it. So I would have named this bounce ball GUI. That's just a bounce ball extends application as usual. Look, they don't have to import much here. Why don't they have to import much here? Because they're doing all the dirty work in the pane, in the ball pane. So all they do, look how short it is. Ball pane is new ball pane. And then put the pane in the scene in the stage and show. Then, the name of the ball pane is pane, by the way. They do this trick, pane, set on mouse pressed, pane pause, set on mouse release, pane play. And then they do this thing where you do the key presses. Oh, what's that about? Okay, so set focus traversable true. Quite frankly, I'd have to look that one up. Set on key pressed. Oh, that's any key, any key. They do a cute trick here. For this event, I would have put this in a separate method and named the method. For this event, fire off this much code. And what are they doing? They're checking what key was pressed. Get the key code. If it's S or F, if it's S, decrease the speed. If it's F, increase the speed. Other than that, don't do a thing. In other words, you're ignoring all the other key presses. I can press all kinds of keys and nothing will happen. But if I press the right ones, then I get decrease and increase speed. Which is weird because I'm pressing arrow keys. So let's see. Oh, that's it. We're not doing ball pane anymore. Okay. Look through those, and you can use these as models to build your own project software. Most of you are doing things where you're going to want a timeline animation. And my advice, as always, forget about your project, build a small animation that you're going to throw away, just so you learn how to do it. Then when it comes time to do your project, you're not learning and designing at the same time. You're having a design and an implementation. Okay, I rushed through those because you have access to that code. And what I wanted to do, let's see, let's get rid of all this stuff. There we go. What I want to do is show you this this other piece of code that is, it's not great. In fact, some of it's really lousy. This is stuff that I was just doing as a kind of as a lark, but it's based on an old late 1970s, early 1980s game called Ripoff. And I never got that far, but it's a good demonstration, I think, for how you might construct your project. Some of this coding, like I said, some of the coding is pretty lousy, but you can always fix that, right? You guys know how to do better. Let's see here. Let me run. Notice, by the way, I named the top level file Pirates Main GUI. So I know that it's the main program and it contains the GUI. I recommend you adopt naming systems like that. And what this does, ta-da, it's got a splash screen, and then it goes to a game where we have animations. And I never created all the opponents, I never created all the combat capabilities, all that stuff. But it shows you animation, and it also shows you how you can construct your project. So if I look here, here's my UML. Let's see, what's the Pirates game? I've got a airship, and then I've got alien ships, and I've got fuel cells, and the aliens are supposed to come in and try to steal the fuel cells and run away with them, and they're protecting the fuel cells. So basically, I don't have any fuel cells yet, but I have the idea for a player ship and an alien ship. Now, as soon as you hear those words, I have a player ship and an alien ship, what are you probably thinking? Or by now, what are you hopefully thinking? I hope you're thinking, oh, you should make a generic ship and then extend it for the player, extend it for the aliens, which is what I did. I have a generic ship, and then I extended it for the player, and I extended it for the aliens. And then, once I have the ships, and I don't have anything else yet, I've got a game manager that will manage the game. So that's my model. Everything, the last two columns there on the right, that's my model. What about the view in the controller? Well, the Pirates main GUI is going to be, and the splash pane is going to be the view. And then the controller kind of straddles between that top pane, Pirates top pane. So what do I have? I have a main GUI. When you first start, it brings in a splash pane. And then when you click the button, it goes to this Pirates top pane. The Pirates top pane will build a game manager, and the game manager effectively builds out the whole game. So it's going to, right now the game only has one player ship, right? So it builds out the whole game. But over time, this would build in the fuel cells and the other alien ships. You have this. I modified this slightly because I forgot it wasn't up to date with my latest code. Documentation and code need to go hand in hand. So I'm recommending that you can do this kind of thing too. You can have a top GUI and then you have a splash pane. And then when the splash pane, you click the button to go on to the game, then it goes on to a top level pane. That thing can control your model manager, and then the manager creates the whole model. That's an acceptable solution. Were I to be more adept at programming or have more time, this game manager is probably doing too much work, and I probably would break it up into a series of smaller objects. But for now, it's fine. Are there questions about this? Okay, when you have them, ask them. Notice, by the way, I'm not showing you code. I will, but I'm not showing you code. I'm showing you my design first. And this is what I'm saying. When you come to ask for help for your coding from myself or from Dean Laga or whoever, pretty much our first question, show me this page, because it's hard to help you if I don't know the design. Show me this page.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Were you able to make this before you started the Pirates game? And like when you finished the Pirates game, was this accurate?
I did both. So because I did this offline just for grins, and because nobody has good coding discipline, including myself, I didn't treat it as a real project. So I did a little bit of both. I had a notional idea for this and I kind of roughed them out, but this is actually post-code documentation as opposed to pre-code design. When I do things in a more, now I did do a dummy version of this, like just to swap out these panes, just to make sure I knew how to do that. I did that on 2 completely blank panes before I brought it into my project. So I am absolutely saying do as I say, not as I do here, right? Because I did a little bit of both. But part of this was because it was like a slow Sunday afternoon, and I rarely have them. And I said, gosh, I wonder if I can do this. And I just started, playing with the code, and the code that I played with actually turned into a lot of this project. So it's a little bit of both. I had the notional idea for these things. As I started coding, I found that I couldn't continue coding until I actually laid out what attributes and methods I need. So then I went back and did a pencil sketch of those beforehand. I did not do this level of quality beforehand. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I want to make sure I wouldn't be the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm trying to enforce discipline on you guys, because your project really is going to give you a hard time. And it is worth it. And I'm also recognizing that as programmers, all of us tend to start coding too early. We all do. And so that's why I'm really pushing this design first. Particularly if we're doing things just for our own enjoyment. Now, when I'm involved in an actual coding project that's a real one, there's a real research project, a real customer base, then we tend to go through this design process a lot more thoroughly ahead of time. How accurately are you? Well, if you have this level of detail, that's great. I'm worried about level of detail. If you have this is the level of detail you're shooting for. Now, is it going to be accurate? No, in the sense that once you start programming, you may find that things you thought were a good idea or you thought would work out may not actually work out in the code. And then you're going to have to modify your code. But of course, you should always keep your UML and your code compatible with each other. Okay, so how did I do this? First, the splash pane, I created my own separate pane because, again, I don't want to do all that dirty work at the top level, and it is a separate thing. So I built a splash pane. We're going to worry about the details in a second, but I built a splash pane. Then I built the actual Pirates pane, where this is the one that has the game manager in it, and that serves as the link between the GUI and the actual model. But how do I make them swap out? It's easy. At the top level, I have a border pane. So I build a border pane, then I build the splash pane. Now remember, the splash pane, I created a unique class called splash pane. It extends pane. And then all the dirty work is in there, but then all I have to do in my main level is say, build me one of those. So build me a splash pane. And then build me a Pirate's Play pane. Now I've got both panes and I've got a border pane. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put the splash pane in the center of the border pane. And when you click the button, it's going to swap out, take the splash pane out of the center and put the play pane in the center of the border pane. That's an easy way to keep switching between scenes. There's only one problem. I have to have a button to do that. Now think about it. Let's go back to here. The button is going to be here in the splash pane, and I want it to have a method that transitions to the play pane, top pane, right? I may have a naming issue there, right? Top pane versus play pane. So the question here is, how do you do that? Because the splash pane doesn't know anything about the other pane, number one. And number two, the actual swapping happens at the wrong level. The swapping happens at this level, up at the top level, right? The top level is the one that says, hey, take the splash pane and replace it with the play pane. That's what the top level does. But the button occurs down here at the lower level. So how do you get around that? Well, who knows about the top level? The top level does. It knows about all the levels. So what I did is I created at the top level, right, in my main GUI, I actually create the button that does the job at the top level. And then when I create the splash pane, where are we? Splash pane, I had a method in there called setContinue. I gave that splash pane the button. Does that make sense? I created the button at the top level and then I gave that button to the splash pane. So it's going to show up at the splash pane, but because it was created at this top level, it knows about all the panes. So here in the splash pane, you'll see I've got a method. I've only got one attribute, right? The button. And remember, I didn't create a button yet. So what do I really have? I have a handle that points to a button. And then I've got a method that will actually assign a real button to that handle. And who gives me that button? The top level gives me that button. And then I've got another method that just sets up that picture.
So if you have a really complicated pane, are you able to like split that into 3 different panes and just kind of layer them on top of each other? Or
Yeah, so often you'll have, rather than layered on top of each other, often you'll have like you can use the border pane to carve up your section into 3 separate panes that are like one on the left, one in the middle, one on the bottom. That's a more common way to do it. But there is something called a stack pane, and the stack pane would allow you to stack panes on top of each other.
like, so you can have like animations overlapping, or because that's what I'm talking about.
That'd be harder. What you can do is you can set up multiple animations in the same pane. You're not limited to one.
But then setting up that pane in a class and stuff is going to get like really complicated or messy.
Yeah. So again, what you can do, let's say, now you can do it a couple ways. One is to have, remember, within that one animation, you can fire off as many methods as you want. So if you've got 5 things moving around, all you do is have a method, you know, move number 1, move number 2, move number 3, move number 4, move number 5. Oh, and by the way, you can put all of those in another method that just says move everything. So you could do it with one animation. But let's say you didn't want to. Let's say you wanted to have 5 different animations. An animation is an object. A timeline is an object. So you could create your class as, you could create a class separate from the pane that you're building. You can say public class animation 1 extends timeline. And then in your pane, instead of doing all the dirty work of building that complicated animation inside the pane, you just say, build me one of those. Build me an animation 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so you see, when I say, you know, you go through the process and you have to decide, these are my objects and these are my classes. It's not a trivial question, right? Should I have done all of this in one class, or should I have separate class for the splash pane and a separate class for the play pane? Should I have broken them down even further? Right? These are not trivial questions. And that's why I say, go ahead and play with it. You know, do something rather than on your project. You know, once your project gets halfway done, if you ever break it in a bad way and you can't figure out what you did to get where you are, so you can't back out, you know, that's a problem. So if you're worried about what's a good way to do these animations, or what's a good way to do such and such, I highly recommend you just make a little tiny mini code off to the side and play and do it, you know, specifically built for that task. Same trick is, you know, if I'm going to do 2 panes side by side and one of them has the controls, but they're the controls for this pane. Well, how the heck do those controls know about that pane? They don't. So what do you have to do? You create that controls at the higher level and give them to that pane. So that's what we're doing here. I create the splash pane, and the button would be useless if it was actually created in the splash pane, because the splash pane doesn't know anything about any of the other panes. Who knows about all the panes? That top level Pirates Main GUI class does. So if it creates a button, and notice that it's an attribute, right? So it's persistent. It creates a button, and then it can give that button to the splash pane. If you had a bunch of controls, like you had a control pane and then an actual view pane, if you had a bunch of controls in the control pane, I would say you could create all those buttons or controls at the higher level and then give them to that control pane. Okay, so I wanted to show you this because I think this trick of swapping out the the panes is one that most students do. For some reason, we all like to have that introductory screen, right? Some of you guys actually have like login screens. How do you go from the login screen to the next screen? Well, it's really a login pane. And then when it's successful, you'll go to the working pane. Some of you have where you want to enter data in text fields, click a button, and then see a graph as a result. Oh, okay, how would you do that? Well, clicking that button will not only kick off the analysis, it will swap out the panes, so you have your graph pane, or the pane that contains the graph in it. If you look at my code here, and again, you have access to this, you know, there's some stuff that's okay with it and stuff that's lousy with it, you know, as with most code that's done on the fly. So we have, this is all the GUI stuff, right, the panes. But one of the things the play pane needs, I have a game manager that controls the entire game. So the play pane needs to make one of those. There it is, manager equals new Pirates game manager. And if you look at my, again, look at my constructor, not very big. Don't put the details in there. So instead I have a couple of methods. Initialize the view. Initialize all ships. Now I call it initialize all ships. I only have one ship, but I'm planning ahead, right? Eventually I'm going to have more than one ship. Initialize all ships. That's initializing the model. Once I initialize the model, I initialize the view. Once I initialize the view, I create the animation. But see, I'm doing all of the detail, the grunt work in those methods. And you can look at all that on your own. We can also talk a little bit more about this on Friday if we want to, because it is project related. Okay, so I do, every 50 milliseconds, all I do is this move all ships method. There's only one ship right now. But every 50 milliseconds, everything that's on the screen is going to get its model position updated. That doesn't mean the view got updated. It means the model position got updated. But look at what I do under move all ships. Move all ships. All I do is I pass the request down to the manager. Hey, manager, move all the ships. You're the game manager. It's your job. Move all the ships. And as soon as I move all the ships, which changes the model, then I say, okay, now I have to change the view. So I reposition my ships on the view. Does that make sense? That's how this model view controller will work. You have a request to change the model, but then you still have to figure out how you're going to change the view. Right? The view has to be consistent with the model. Now, as I said, part of this is a little clunky because that game manager is probably doing too much work. Maybe we could have broken it down into smaller chunks, but it's fine for a demo, and it's absolutely fine to use as a model for your project. And even for your Hound and Hare homework. Unless, I can't remember if Dean prescribed what files you have to have for that, but if not, you can certainly do a top level GUI, a play pane, and then the model of the hound and the model of the hare. Okay, once I have the game manager is fairly straightforward. I mean, it's just, most of this code is just boring stuff where you're setting up locations, setting up parameters. That's most of it. The ships themselves, the player ship, nothing. Alien ship, nothing. It's all here in generic ship. The player ship, and again, this is actually part of the not so great code. I probably should have had the generic ship be blank methods and then fix them in the player ship. The alien ship, if I ever get around to making one, will definitely have changes because their movement is going to be based, the player ship moves based on the user input, and the alien ships move based on trying to steal these fuel cells. So the actual dirty work is done here in the generic ship class. And all of that code is nothing more than moving forward. If you hit a boundary, make sure you don't go out of bounds, and keep track of your direction, because if we run this thing, you'll notice I have a little tiny directional indicator in that circle. Also notice my key press detected, turn ship method has been triggered, key press detected. That's showing you that this code is not in a finished state. It's showing you that I am was keeping my empty prototype methods in there. Remember I said it's not a bad idea to create all your methods empty, and all they do is say, somebody called me. And I kept that stuff in there because as I'm kind of working through my informal troubleshooting, there we go. As I'm working through my informal troubleshooting, then it can be helpful to have those kinds of verifications. Okay, we're out of time. Take a look at this stuff. If I have lousy code, tell me. That's okay. It's all about improving the product, right? But this can serve as a model. We'll look at this again a little bit more on Friday and go through some other project stuff. One thing I want to get out there really quick, you'll see that you have a brand new assignment about the P3 deliverable, and it's about peer review. We talked about this last Friday with the people that were in both lab sessions, both class sessions. And so this is the result that I've come up with, is breaking you guys into groups of 3. Put your P3 up early so that your 2 other people in your group have time to look at it and give you feedback, improvements to improve your grade. That's the goal. The review happens before you turn this in. And we'll go through this peer review process for P3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay? We'll talk about it more on Friday. Okay, have a good day, guys.